The big guests keep rolling in here on the James Collins Ireland show. And my guest on this morning is most certainly that fantastic chap to get on to interview, have a conversation with. I followed lots of his work, really affable chap, fairly intelligent, adroit. So I said, God, I got to get this fella on. So I reached out to him. It was only less than a week ago. And he said, no problem, let's come on. So he's Mark Collet from the British Alternative, the British Patriotic Alternative, and .org.net, I believe the website is. Anyway, I've included it in the description below the video. Good morning. Thanks very much for coming on the show. We've got lots to talk about, Mark.
Well, thank you for inviting me, James. It's a real pleasure to be here. We are Patriotic Alternative. The link is below. Feel free to check us out. We've got a big activity coming up next month called Demographic Replacement Awareness Month, and that is where we are aiming to deliver over 100,000 leaflets around the UK telling people about the issues facing the indigenous people of these islands, which is obviously that we will be a demographic minority by 2066 or sooner.
Yeah, well, I think of a lot less than that. We can get on to that point. Here in Ireland, actually, we were told only about 2 weeks ago that we're going to be taking in 20,000 Ukrainians. Then last week, that turned up to 100,000, again, quote unquote, Ukrainians, because, of course, our wonderful Prime Minister / Taoiseach, Jack Boot Me Hole, was straight out from the very start. And his biggest concern was saying that there'll be no security checks made, no identification papers are actually needed. So it's a complete open borders. Now, the great news is that just, I think it was yesterday, that number has doubled up to 200,000. So I think logically by next week, Mark, we could be up around 400,000, and maybe let's round that off to 500,000. So this is Ireland now. We're going to be looking to house the world. They're pulling on the heartstrings. The real jackboot is dropping down on Paddy and Bridie or Oisin or Cueva, and now is the time whether people will either die on their knees or they'll get up and stand for who they are, their culture and their future.
Indeed. And in Ireland, I believe, I might be getting this wrong, I think you've got about, 6.2 million people in Ireland already?
Well, in the Republic of Ireland, it's roughly 5 million. Yeah,
so 5 million. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say you were to take 250,000 of these refugees. That would be 5% of your total population. When we're talking these numbers in England or in Great Britain as a whole, it's bad enough. But when you're talking those numbers in Ireland, you are talking numbers that are basically swamping. You are talking huge percentages of the population. And what we've already seen is when they're saying Ukrainian refugees, people are expecting a Ukrainian family. And people know what we mean by Ukrainian. We mean ethnic Ukrainians. And instead, they're getting people who are sub-Saharan African. That is not Ukrainian. They are not Ukrainians. So I understand that people want to open their homes or are more willing to open their homes to people who are closer to them. So obviously Ukrainians are not the same as the Irish, just as the same as English are not the same as the Irish. But the Irish, the English and the Ukrainians have far more in common than the Irish do with, say, Somalians or Nigerians. And it's going to come as a great shock to people when they open their homes expecting a family with the same religious beliefs, with the same cultural norms, the same cultural acceptance, and instead they get maybe an Islamic family from Somalia. That's going to be a big shock.
Yeah. And on top of that, you see, then straight away, Mark, of course, black tape is actually put over their mouth. So absolutely, yeah, you're right. And with the numbers as well, the 5%, you're accurate in saying that. You probably got the 6 point odd by including Northern Ireland. So you're actually correct. On the island of Ireland, let's say it's up around, let's say 7 million. But anyway, the most important thing is, you see, already and for a number of years, we've had a massive housing crisis here. It's actually after the last controlled demolition of the economy that started around Halloween 2007 onwards, we were already developing a huge housing shortage. Okay, and so Then you roll through it. I mean, you couldn't really make it up, see the wave of actually what happens, okay? So then you actually have spoof 19 that comes along then, Mark, right? So people have to stay in their houses as well, put nappies on their faces, don't mix with anyone. You can't visit grandmother actually in hospital as well. If you think about this in a logical way, you're supposed to stay at home to stay safe. Now suddenly people are asked to actually open up their doors and have people that they don't know, never met, not sure where they're actually from. And if they are actually, let's call them dark-skinned Ukrainians that actually are indeed coming from, let's say, Africa, Bangladesh, Pakistan, they're also not even able to ask them as well. And if they are, that's deemed, you see, as racist. So the PC narrative then comes in that way. And then there's two things down the line you've just had recently. I know we're going to talk about it. You mentioned, of course, this online hate speech as well. So it's put as safety. Of course, it's always safety, because when the jackboot is on your head, remember, it's for your own safety. But also, we're going to have an upcoming referendum, and it's going to be the right to housing for all residents as well. So that's wonderful. So that means, say, for instance, if our new Ukrainian friend, Walala Umbeka Umbasa, okay, touches down off the flight here, okay, he's actually entitled to a house straight away. Now, forget about, but you know, I don't want to go on or labor this point as well, because there's so much to talk about. But you know what's sort of annoying? How will, say, Irish people are out there, you see, they're going through their towns, their villages, and they can see the level of homelessness, of destitution, of, you know, whether it be alcohol, drug abuse, or just unfortunate that people lost their jobs, they're on the street, and how they can walk by them, okay, and then in their minds, they're on their brain rot box, okay, and they're sending on these crying emojis as well. Oh, we need to do more for these. I mean, look at. There's a lot in that there. I like to add a bit of a comic flavor into it all, but I'll tell you what, because ridicule is man's most potent weapon, I 100% agree with that. But look, what do you think of that, Mark?
I completely agree. I think it was actually Jim Davidson, the comedian here in Britain, who said, it's amazing how quickly all these liberals will open their doors to a family of refugees because they want to be seen as the biggest virtue signaler in their white, leafy village in the middle of nowhere. But none of these people have ever suggested opening their doors to ex-servicemen who are living on the streets. And in Britain, we have hundreds of thousands of people who are homeless, sleeping rough every night. And there is never cause for people to open their homes and take those people. And I understand, I'm not going to sugarcoat this and claim that everybody on the street doesn't want to be there, because some of these people do. There are people who are living on the street out of choice because they can't fit into society, because they live a transient life. But there are also many good people who have fallen on hard times, who have struggled, who have specifically struggled in some sort of transitional period of their life. So they come out of the armed forces, they leave their parents. There are young people, young lads, young girls who are living on the streets because they come from an abusive home, because they were maybe being sexually abused or physically abused by their parents, or by a step parent, or somebody living in their house, and they either weren't believed, didn't think they would be believed, they fled, and now they are living hand to mouth, you know, begging on the streets. But there isn't really support for those people, but there is always endless support for wave after wave of refugees. And I would say that, yes, although the Ukrainians have more in common with somebody living in the British Isles than, say, somebody from sub-Saharan Africa, somebody from the Middle East, somebody from the Indian subcontinent, we still wouldn't be able to accept or tolerate swamping numbers of those people, because if they do come here in those vast numbers and they do settle, they will change the cultural and ethnic balance of our nation, especially a nation like the Republic of Ireland, which is so small and there are so few people there already. And I don't want to see the Irish people replaced or their culture airbrushed out in their homeland, because wave after wave of swamping migrants have come in and really taken over and completely transformed Ireland into something it was never meant to be.
Oh, that's the old unmute. Yeah, Do you know, absolutely, I agree with, do you know, pretty much everything you're actually saying there. What's the root? What's the really behind it? We know that you see a lot of sophistry is used as well, these clever arguments as well. So the main aim, of course, is to subjugate people as well. But the fact that they're actually doing it willingly, you said the virtue signal. Yeah, absolutely. They think that they're part of the vanguard, you know, these SJWs as well. And really the main thing behind that, Mark, right, why they do that is, of course, is they're not actually affected directly yet. And that's why. Do you see, I see it this way. They still have room to actually run away. They can run and they can hide. They can scurry like a little rat into their latibule and go on their FBI book or their Instagram, and they can humble brag as well till the cows come home and say how much of a wonderful, true and virtuous person they are. But you see, they're doing it. What's driving this is cowardice. That's one word, it's cowardice, okay? But they still have room to run, you see, from the juggernaut, okay? We had the bio-fascist juggernaut, okay, moving in. So they actually still have room to maneuver, but that room is actually running out, okay? And then you see, deep, you see, in the recesses of the limbic system, the lizard or reptilian brain, when spoof 19 came in, you see a lot of them were fooled, so it was clicked onto flight mode, okay? But actually, and then you have fight or flight, but soon enough now, you see the flight mode is actually going to be taken out of the equation. It's flight, it's fight or die. And that's where we're actually coming close to that. And I'm not actually exaggerating. This is all out. You know, it was a psychological operation, and now it really is. This is an all-out now attack. It's the coup de grace, okay? I don't want to use, we'll say, hyperbole, but we'll say, for instance, talking about Ireland, as you quite rightly said, you know, such a small population, and now it's already been changing, okay, dramatically, and now that's going to change radically as well. So you're right, and then people out there becoming more and more deracinated, and it's the complete extirpation as well of our culture, our future, you know, our history. And unfortunately, we still have these somnambulists walking around, these sleepwalkers that are effectively on barbiturates, okay, and they're more worried about putting smiling or crying emojis on their brain rot box than they are of actually facing what is taking place right before their eyes.
I completely agree. I think there's two tiers here of what's going on. I think there's an upper tier, and the upper tier are people who are controlling this, and they absolutely know what they're doing. They're doing this because they want to create a mixed up world. They want a cultureless, rootless, cosmopolitan, materialistic people that have no racial heritage, no cultural heritage, no real traditions, no actual history. They want people who have no roots, that can just be herded around, can be wage slaves, can be happy with whatever they're given, and they're not really bonded to anyone or anything. So they're very easy to manipulate. And obviously, mass immigration and the mass movement of people is one of the ways that the people at the very top hope to create this change, hope to build this new person. But at the level further down, the people who are not in charge, that's where you have your virtue signalers. That's where you have your liberal morons. That's where you have people who will take up these policies because they actually think they're doing the right thing. But more than thinking they're doing the right thing, they want to be seen to be doing the right thing. So I think for a lot of these people who are taking them in or saying they want to take them in, I don't think they actually want to take them in. I don't think they actually want to do that. If you got them in a room and said, right, we're doing a lie detector test. Do you want these people in your house? Is this something you actually desire? The lie detector test would prove that they didn't desire it, but they want to be seen to desire it, and they want to be seen to be doing it because they get essentially what is social credit for doing it. There's been a big hoo-ha about this social credit system in China, and this social credit system is apparently evil and bad, and maybe that's a discussion for another day because I've got quite an interesting take on that. But the social credit system here in the UK is enforced via the mainstream media, via social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and it's enforced in terms of likes and shares, and on the other hand, condemnation and being reported and having your profile disappear. And people now are doing things that their gut is probably telling them is the wrong thing, but they're doing it because they want their social credit on social media. So these people further down the line, they're probably not in lockstep with what the powers that be actually want, but they're carrying out the will of the powers that be because they're getting positive social reinforcement for doing it in these liberal echo chambers. And they are echo chambers because at one point, Facebook would have had a counterbalance to the liberal narrative, to the virtue signaling, but now it doesn't. Every person I know who used to be a counterbalance to that has either been kicked off the platform or effectively silenced. And I'll give you an example of people who are still on the platform but have been silenced. I know a girl, she's a lovely lady. She works hard, she's got her own business, and she spoke out on Facebook simply by sharing something during the so-called pandemic. And she was warned that if she says anything about that again, they said, this is your warning, basically. She got a note saying, this is your warning. You can't post now for 3 days. And if you do this again, it's 30 days. Now, she runs a business, so she cannot afford to not be on Facebook for 30 days because her customers contact her through Facebook. So although our government will tell you there is no social credit system in the UK, there is absolutely a social credit system in the UK, but it is enforced not directly by the government with a guy coming and knocking on your door saying, did you post this, mate? You know, we're going to take you around the back here and give you a kicking for doing it or lock you up. But it's enforced by Mark Zuckerberg. It's enforced by Sergey Brin. It's enforced by the guy who is now running Twitter. Used to be Jack Dorsey. I forget the name of the guy who's running it now. But all these people are enforcing this social credit system, and people are either going to the gulag forever or keeping their mouth shut for the good of their businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. There isn't someone coming around to your gaff quite yet, that is, but that's sort of the next stage, that this moves on. But it is a sort of these socialist media accounts. It's laying down the groundwork. It's training. It's training like Pavlov's dogs as well, how they can basically self-police. Mark, it's to actually put the black tape over their own mouth, and it gets to that way. Why not look for likes? Why not release a few endorphins by following along with the Vox Populi, unfortunately. And as I said, they think that they're part of the avant-garde, but you see, where the cowardice actually comes across there is they know that. Now, you can tie this into, unfortunately, what they're doing is compartmentalization. Now, Sigmund Freud spoke a lot about that as well. This is like a protectionist measure. Unfortunately, it's deleterious for your mental health, okay? And once you keep on acquiescing then to imposition, and you keep on that's it, censoring yourself, policing yourself, it actually leads to madness, I believe. It leads to mental illness. And that's why a lot of these radical lefties that are on these sites are the levels of mental illness actually on display are through the roof. So you look at what a lot of this is what we're talking about and what we're sort of meeting out and punching the bag about, really. It's keeping people in a perpetual state of crisis. And that's it. And unfortunately, the massive thing about this is people subscribe to a lot of this. I would say that, if it gets to the stage that someone has a business and they think it could come under threat by what they're saying on a socialist media account, then the easiest thing is to delete the socialist media account. It means it's septic. It is a cesspool. Like you look at the likes of Twitter, as you quite rightly said, they're echo chambers. There's all these NPC robots that are out there, and they're talking absolute nonsense that has no middle, no beginning, and no end. And that's it. Also, ultimately, what they're looking for is it's like that new meme that says, "I support the latest thing," and that's it.
Well, that's what it is. And when you look at the last few years, what have we really had? If you look at the way it's gone, you've had people on Facebook with the BLM sticker. You've had people on Facebook with the Biden sticker. You've had people on Facebook replacing all their profile pictures with them in a mask. And now you've got people on Facebook replacing all of that with either a yellow and blue flag or some other yellow and blue symbolry. So they're holding yellow and blue flowers, and you probably get extra points if you've managed to combine some of those things. So if now you're sat on Facebook and you've got a yellow and blue face mask, you probably get double social credit points. You're probably pushed up the algorithm. And this isn't hyperbole. This isn't some sort of conspiracy theory. Facebook pay teams and teams of people to sit monitoring people's chats, to sit monitoring what people are saying and push the discourse in the right direction. When I say in the right direction, I mean, in their sort of view of the right direction. But that's very, very insidious, isn't it? Because what you've got here, and I've talked about this in my videos, you can find them all on BitChute, you can find them all on Odyssey. I've called Facebook and the social media companies the new public square. People don't go to the pub anymore. People don't go to church anymore. People don't go to the village hall for a dance anymore on a Friday night. People talk to one another through their smart devices, through their computers, through their laptops, through their phones, through their tablets, and they talk on these social media platforms. But these social media platforms, they're not a church hall. They're not a public house. They're not a working men's club. They are a place where everything you say, even your profile, your personality, your pictures, your connections, everything can be deleted and disappear down the memory hole with a single click of a mouse button. And that's happened to me. That's happened to me. Everything I did on Facebook disappeared. And that included other services that you sign into with Facebook. So it doesn't just affect Facebook. It affects, games, services, business websites that say just log in through Facebook. And, over time, you just get used, click login that. It's the easy way. Everything's linked together. But when it goes, a huge number of things in your life just disappear down that memory hole. And that is a very, very damaging thing. And personally speaking, I can see why people don't want to lose that. I know you say you can divorce yourself from it, but a lot of people, their businesses are tied in from it. If you own, say, a small business in a small town selling goods and services, Facebook is a place where you can advertise for free. You can get in touch with people. And I'll tell you how this has affected people. My partner, we've got a little girl. She's a toddler. She's just over 2 years old now. And my partner used to go in the mother and baby groups. And she said that during the BLM stuff, they were completely filled. All these mother and baby groups were completely filled with the BLM stuff. And anyone that spoke out about it disappeared. So the other people who didn't want to lose their access to the recipes and other things and the resources just kept quiet. And this has been quite a brutal way of herding everybody into the same sort of mental cage. And even if you don't want to be there, a lot of people are kind of tied into that. And a lot of people don't want to lose their connections with their mum or their non-political friends. It's very, very insidious. And when you look at how Facebook started, and when you look at the people who started these social networks and these means of communication, I believe all of this was done as not a system to make our lives better, but as a system of social control. And this system of social control, it is absolutely working. And lots of people now, as we said earlier, they're not necessarily bad people, but they are just going along with the flow because they don't want to lose what they see as an important service. And really, this poses the question, how would you deal with something like this? Well, I believe that social media companies, I believe a law needs to be passed that if you are speaking on social media and you are not breaking the law, you should be allowed to remain on social media. So, for example, we have very robust laws in the UK on things like threats to kill, using threatening or abusive language. Now, using threatening and abusive language or threatening to kill somebody has always been a criminal offense. If you are threatening violence or calling for others to commit violence against individuals, their property or groups, that has always been against the law. We do not need new online safety laws, and we certainly don't need Facebook to have their own interpretation of the law where, Joe Bloggs says, not too sure that all these illegal migrants should be crossing the border every day and being given houses, and boom, he gets a hate speech strike, because there's no such thing as hate speech. You're either inciting something or you're not, and he clearly isn't. And this is the problem. Social media has now become the public square, but they're also the ones who are effectively creating and enforcing their own laws, and that absolutely needs to stop.
Yeah, to pick up your point, absolutely, with people, they've invested so much time. Essentially, what it is that they're kettled. They're kettled into this area, and then they're coerced, and they're held hostage. I can remember when FBI books started off, very soon I realized that it attracted these vacuous and inanimate NPCs. So things like, I had sausage, eggs, and chips. And then they got a like for that. And then they went over to their friends page, who reposted photos of them on the beach in Santa Ponsa 3 years ago. And and then they clicked, we'll say, like on that. Okay, yeah. When it also with Facebook, someone it stuck out to me. This was like literally 2009, 2010. Someone was describing, what is Facebook? What's it all about? Now, a lot of people still didn't know about it. It was like, well, take this example. It really stuck with me. Okay, fantastic. He said, basically, it's like if you're in a bar chatting to your friend, and just about different things, football, hotels, holidays. It's like a sales and marketing executive is actually sitting in between you, and you bring up soccer, and next minute there's a poster saying 20% off the Premier League viewing for the next 6 months. And then someone says, hey, I'm looking for a nice hotel. And then he lifts up the sign then as well. And that's it. You're kettled into these areas. And it really stuck out. I said, that's absolutely bang on. And I'm pretty sure this was 2009. So that's 13 years ago. So that person giving that assessment to what Facebook was. But of course, it's much more than that now. It's linked in with people's businesses, etc. So look,
it was a golden time, wasn't it? What you're saying here is basically, originally everyone's biggest fear about Facebook was that they were going to say to a friend, you know what, can't come round on Saturday night, I'm doing the gardening. And they'd wake up the next morning and find that all the adverts on their pages were going to be for gardening stuff, buy a shed, buy a new spade, buy a lawnmower. And they're going to be like, blooming hell, these guys have read my mind. I need all these things because I'm doing the garden. And people's fears were that they were being kind of spied upon or monitored, that their words were being carefully picked over so that they could be sold a product. That was people's big fear, that there was going to be a greater emphasis on targeted marketing. And to be fair, I'm not completely against that. I understand that people have to make money. And if adverts are more relevant to me, well, not the end of the world. But if people's biggest fear at the time was that it was going to be targeted marketing, that was going to be our big thing, well, they were a little bit off the mark, because now it isn't targeted marketing. It is essentially complete political oversight and control. They're not looking for people. Well, they are still looking for people who are talking about, well, can't come and see you this weekend, mate, doing the gardening. Right, we'll sell this guy some, some tools and, a lawnmower. They are still looking for that because they're still making money. But it's far more insidious now. It is every lifestyle comment you make, every lifestyle choice you make. If that's the wrong choice, you go down the algorithm, or at worst, you're completely banned from the site and you lose everything on that site. Or it's potentially worse, because people are now, these social networks now are connecting with law enforcement and are trying to turn innocent comments such as, well, sorry, fella, you're clearly a man, into a hate crime. And you are actually now having, not only are you getting kicked off social media, you are actually having a very politicized police force, because there are hate crime units all over the UK now that exist solely to monitor speech. And I actually know people who have said nothing whatsoever that's illegal, nothing whatsoever that is abusive, but they have expressed an opinion. And they have actually had a knock on the door from a group called Prevent, who come to your house and say, we're not saying you've done anything illegal, but maybe you'd like to invite us in and we could have a chat about your opinions. There are officers being paid to go to people's houses in the United Kingdom to have a chat with people about their legally held opinion and their right to espouse that legal opinion. This isn't some dystopian novel. This isn't 1984. This is the reality of 2022 in a so-called Western liberal democracy. And you put all this together and you start to realize that it is, in fact, Western liberal capitalist democracy that is the cancer. That is the problem. And this is leading not only to our erasure, but to a situation where we cannot even complain or speak out against our erasure.
Yeah, I suppose you could say you're calling it like technocratic feudalism. That's really they're pushing that towards. But it's also as well, what I've noticed a huge amount is that it's actually affecting people's interaction and their communicational skills as well. And that's the idea. So there's more and more of these SJWs that are on the phones, the younger people. They're more diffident and monosyllabic, right? Their communication, they're not interested. Their faces, as you quite rightly said there earlier on, people used to meet in a town hall or up at the footy game meeting their kids. Now their interactions are done through a digital interface. So when the phones are put away, you actually see that the interaction is quite perfunctory. And they lead these desultory lifestyles as well. They're up in their room. It's a multi-pronged attack. It's more than that. Do you know it's a huge thing that people like our good selves, I can say, haven't been talking too much about, but we should be, is diet change that's out there. Say, for instance, 20, 25 years ago, people be having better food, more stews, a lot of more whole food out there. Now the rise of takeaways of these pizzas and kebabs, I mean, basically what they are fried pig vomit, So,
well, look, and also you've got this rise of this militant veganism. Now, in times gone by, if you were on a vegetable only diet, if you were eating sort of bowls of just vegetable gruel, you were on what was called a starvation diet. That's the kind of stuff that was fed to people in a workhouse. That was the kind of diet that led to people dying young. And what we're doing now is we are cutting out eggs, we are cutting out meat, we are cutting out dairy, we are actually cutting out all of the superfoods. We are cutting out the foods that are high in nutrients, the foods that are high in protein content, the foods that are high in natural and healthy animal fats, and we are replacing this all with things like a pile of green beans. Well, when you look at people in a queuing up for food because they're starving, what are they not being given? They're not being given a big fat plate of steak and eggs. They are being given a bowl of vegetable gruel. And probably the greatest trick our enemies have managed to pull, or one of the greatest tricks, is convincing people that a starvation diet, that a bowl of vegetable gruel is actually the most healthy and nutritious and beneficial thing that normal people can eat. So you've got these normal people, and they are actually more or less begging to be put on a starvation diet. And what is that starvation going to diet lead to? Well, it will lead to all manner of problems. It leads to people's hair falling out. It leads to people not being able to recover from diseases. In this recent so-called pandemic, I wonder how many people struggled to recover from any form of infection, more so than they would normally, because of poor diet, because of the fact that they've totally cut out eggs and meat and fish from their diet. It's no coincidence that sections of society throughout history who have had a diet that has included more meat, more eggs, and more fish have been healthier, they've lived longer, and they have over time grown to be the ones within that society who have had higher IQs, because that kind of diet is totally linked with human brain development. So what are we going to end up being? Well, we will be sickly, we will not recover from any disease as quickly as we would otherwise. And on top of that, we will have lower testosterone counts. We won't breed as much. We won't be able to fight back. We won't be as mentally astute. Again, This is all part of a system that is being crafted to turn us into the perfect, rootless, materialistic slaves. And it will also affect our ability to breed, because people who live on a low protein diet, who live on a diet that is mainly plant matter, they don't go on to naturally breed as easily as those who are eating a traditional healthy diet. And what's more, for people in European countries like Britain and Ireland, for large parts of the year, it would be unthinkable for us to be on a completely vegetable-based diet because of the seasonal changes. During winter, during spring, we would eat more meat, fish, and dairy to make up for the lack of fruit and vegetables that are available because of the changing seasons. We don't live in Africa. We don't live, in South America, in places where fruit is, on the trees or on the bushes all year round. But we are being put in now into a situation that is not only historically very out of kilter with what we used to do, but is actually very bad for us. And you look at all these things encroaching on us, sort of social media, the transformation of our people, the virtue signaling, the bad diet, and we are going to be turned into weakened people. We're going to be turned into the perfect slaves. And I'll tell you this now, whilst we're having all this done to us, these elites, they are going to be eating their steak and eggs. They are still going to be driving around in their petrol and diesel cars. If anyone thinks for a minute that the global elite will be pottering around in completely efficient electric cars, no. They will still have their Italian supercars, and they will still be driving to the restaurants where they will be eating the finest salmon, the finest fillet steaks. They will be enjoying life just as they always did. And we will be the one paying for their lifestyle, just as we've seen very recently. And I always love it when they say this. I love it when politicians say, but we're all in this together. No, we are not. We are not all in this together. We are in this and you are separate. Our petrol is going through the roof. You have just given yourself a 2,000, every one of those scumbags in Parliament have just given themselves a £2,200 a year pay rise. So when their fuel bills go up, they're covered, and they're not even paying for petrol. It doesn't matter to them if petrol is £4 a litre, because we're paying for their petrol. We're paying for our petrol, and we're paying for their petrol as well. These people are taking us for a ride, and we are absolutely not in this together. They are a people apart from us, and that is why they are prospering, and that is why we are going under. And when they say things like, oh, all the restrictions and sanctions on Russia, we've just got to take one for the team. No, it's the average British family that's taking one for the team. It's not the people imposing the sanctions. People like Liz Truss, people like Nadine Dorries, people like Boris Johnson, if it was coming out of their pay packet, there would be no restrictions. It's because it's coming out of ours.
Actually, well said and great point. And you picked it up, you corrected Richie Allen here, my fellow Irishman there from Waterford, on that point when he was saying we. And you said, hold on there, actually, Richie. It's not we, it's not them. And of course, that very same point as well. It doesn't really matter. It's £4, £8. They don't really care as well. They're just encouraging, you see, because communitarianism, okay, that rise of it, you're actually programming the flesh bots then to press the self-destruct button. And I do believe at the moment we're actually seeing an implosion, okay, with people, you see, because it will get to the stage, that it's whatever these government diktats, these punitive measures, proscriptive measures that are made, they'll nod their head, they will acquiesce to imposition every single time, because guess what? They're programmed to do it, okay? And then they can be told from their television or their brain rat box that the people standing up for your humanitarian rights, your future, they're the bad people. It's like Scarface, isn't it, in the movie? He says, say goodbye to the bad guy. So, yeah.
Look, that's probably the most beautiful part of the plan. The people out there who are saying, don't give up your rights, don't give up your freedoms. We're the ones who are evil. I remember when you were seeing up to 1 million people on the streets in London protesting against recent restrictions. And those people were called evil. They were called insane. They were told that they were mad. You know, people out on the streets saying that people shouldn't be prosecuted for meeting in groups of 6 or more. You know, these people are madmen. Well, the other week, the press was saying, in Russia, there is a law that means if people protest against the war in groups of 6 or more, they could be arrested under Putin's mad doctrines. And you're thinking to yourself, so just about 6 months ago, you were telling us that if we had Christmas dinner with Grandma and Grandad, the SWAT team should come bursting in and drag us down to the police station on Christmas Day in handcuffs. But if Russia were to do that, which they're actually not, but if they were, you know, they would be absolute evil. So none of this makes sense. None of this makes sense. 1 minute, these people are calling for us to lose all of our freedoms and cheering on the police as they arrest couples for walking their dog in the countryside. But at the same time, we're the ones that are fighting for freedom and calling for democracy. Yeah. Democracy is an absolute sham. Western liberal democracy is one big lie, and everything they are selling you is horse manure. And the saddest part about it is the vast majority of people are gobbling up this horse manure at an alarming rate.
No, they're begging for it. They're begging to be subjugated. And you said it doesn't make sense. And we both know, we're smart enough to know that it's not actually supposed to make sense. It's designed to perplex and flummox the brain. In fact, now what remains is they want a vox populi, a stupefied populace manipulated by these self-serving ideologues. That's the idea. They want to turn men into eunuchs as well. They want to say, they wanted to beg it. So it's to rendering them, I suppose the key is rendering them, I would say, unable, Mark, to even trust their own perception. And that's it. And then you're controlled. You effectively have serfs on a plantation. And as you said, we will be working for them. That's what is techno capitalist feudalism. There's someone aligned to the WEF that actually wrote about that. And that's to create, we'll say you have a state. Right now here in Ireland, like our state is the executive government, the Oireachtas and the judiciary. Okay. Now they're the Mockingbird media is, of course, the government's private propaganda institute as well. And then they can have the Gestapo then on the street as well. And they all work in tandem in one big symbiotic relationship, okay? But the idea is in the future, you will have these, call them arranged, whatever, oligarchs, plutocrats, okay? You'll have, we'll say, the state, the aristocrats, and then essentially you'll have a state, you'll have finance, and call it whatever, big tech, call it, big pharma then as well. And they'll all be unified. They'll be like the 0.1%, and the rest of the people will be serfs. They will be slaves. Okay, maybe they even want to tell themselves different. They want to convince themselves. They want to still buy into all of the amphibology that's out there. These, grammatically, it's trying to confuse and flummox the brain. I before said, at the start of this, I would have said sophistry, okay? And that's, as we know, the clever use of argument. But now it's just blatant deceit. This subterfuge is just absolute propaganda. And as you said, now they keep on contradicting themselves. But again, it's now done. This is run by psychologists, by psychoanalysts, by behavioral scientists, you see, because people don't stop. You're not allowed once you subscribe to this madness, there's no time for introspection. You see, that's the idea. And you can't go through, we'll say, catharsis. You can't release any of that, as you quite rightly said, horse manure out there. Because there's no time to take accountability. You're keep on pushed on. You're ushered on into the next scam that's around,
You're right. It's one thing. It's one thing after another. You push from one thing to the next, but there is one common thread throughout all of this. And that is, as you were getting to the point there, everything natural, normal, and healthy is turned on its head and inverted. And everything that is unnatural, everything that's bad for you, everything that's mad and insane is then placed on a pedestal. So what they're essentially doing is taking away all of the good in the world. And when they take away all of the good, that creates a vacuum. And then they wish to fill that vacuum with something bad. And we all end up then worshipping evil and pursuing evil, doing what is wrong for us. And what makes this worse is they don't just replace the good with the evil, but the evil itself is then painted as a virtue. And we worship that virtue, we aspire to it. And when you worship evil, when you aspire to be rotten and mad and insane, it corrupts you, it corrupts the people around you, and it destroys everything. It's akin to ingesting poison. And the more of this poison you ingest, the more sick you become. But unfortunately, when you turn around and say, hey, I'm eating this poison and it's making me sick, the response is always the same. That's because you haven't eaten enough of it. It's not stop eating the poison, it's eat more. Because when you have double the dosage, that'll make you better. You need to complete the course of the medicine. But the more of it you take, the more sick you get. And eventually, the dose that's finally meant to heal you will be the dose that actually kills you, because that's the game plan. It's to make you more sick, to make you more ill, and to eventually wipe us from the face of the planet. And what they've done here is very clever, because the establishment's in on it, social media's in on it, the mainstream media's in on it, and the few dissenting voices are slowly being pushed out to the fringes. And this isn't a capitalist society. This isn't a free market society. Because if it was a free market, everything would be simply about the pursuit of profit. And somebody would say, well, there's hundreds of thousands, millions of people that want to hear, you know, what James and Mark have got to say, because there were YouTube channels like mine which had videos with millions of views on them. So there's obviously a market of people that want to be serviced. So there's profit to be made. So ultimately, when we go on new platforms like Odyssey, like BitChute, like Telegram, like Gab, people should be happy about this. So there's profit to be made. We'll support them. You know, at the end of the day, we will allow these guys to process payments. We will allow these guys to have servers. But this isn't a free market. This is essentially communism via the capitalist system. This is cultural Marxism controlling a warped capitalist system. And it's why when you look at capitalism and communism, they are not two separates. They're two sides of the same coin, which lead to the same goal, which is the complete control of people. They just go about achieving that control in, you know, different ways. But ultimately, it's the same people running the show, and it's the same end game. And we are now reaching this end game. And it might not be a Soviet commissar coming and knocking on your door. It might not be somebody listening through the walls and ringing the local NKVD office. What it is instead is somebody reporting you on Facebook and Prevent coming to your door. And it's not being done via state-owned industries. It's being done by what is supposedly a free market, but is in fact this woke capitalist system that is owned by the same people who essentially were the Soviet commissars, or at the very least, I mean, let's be fair, it's not the same, exactly the same people, but it is their descendants.
Yeah, correct. And woke is most certainly not a fashionable word. I say to people, when you hear woke, actually replace it with communism. Also, another thing, as you said quite rightly there, online as well, how people are shut out, how they're excommunicated, how they're, this is the cancel culture, but also these neo-Marxists as well in society have for years and years, even before the internet, okay, is how they can make an economy, a society actually implode, is that they constantly blame the capitalists. But when is actually, in fact, it's the regulatory state that causes systemic failure. So they'll always find it. An example is Conjob 1984, we'll say, or Spoof 19. We say the BLM as well, you know, get people out, spend money. Oh, they're peacefully burning down cities. Okay, that's perfectly fine. You know, it's always the next, and they're mostly made up. The LGBT goon brigade as well. There's always some new letter edition as well, and there's always money then piped into that. And then you, of course, here in Ireland, we have these NGOs, these quangos, okay, that are paid with Irish tax money. And one of the last stats I heard is that they were paid $6 billion in a year. Now, these are people that are weaponized against the Irish, and ironically then people actually pay them. They're funded by the state to actually attack the proletariat, to attack the citizenry, you know, and then online they attack the netizens as well then online, you know. So Listen, all I want to know is, Mark, right? When is this war, possibly even a pseudo war over in the Ukraine, finishing up? Because I've got a great idea for a movie there to be on Netflix. It's going to be an African Ukrainian that's going to fall in love with a transgender Russian soldier.
Well, I can tell you this, that would probably get picked up by a big studio, but I think this war is an interesting one. I think it's an interesting one because we're hearing a lot of disinformation. I've said this on other streams, so I'll quite try to keep this brief. I know we're coming up to the end of the hour, but what you're seeing here is a war that people don't understand, and they don't understand it because they are used to seeing American and British armies going to war. Now, when America and Britain invade a nation, they do things very differently. First, they bomb that nation to the ground. They flatten it. They brutalize it. When they've bombed it and flattened it, they roll in the tanks, the heavy artillery, the mortar, and they shell it and make sure it's extra flat. So they turn it into a parking lot, and then they flatten it further. And then when they flattened it, they roll the troops in, and anything that's still moving, they shoot. Man, woman, child, dog, goat, a bumblebee could fly past and it's open fire. They destroy everything. And in that process, they destroy the gas, the electric, the water, their mobile telephone connections, the internet. Everything is destroyed. So when Britain and America went into Iraq, and Britain and America were the bad guys in that war. They were the bad guys. They were the forces of evil. They killed 200,000 civilians through acts of direct violence alone, and between 300 and 800,000 more, depending on which source you read, died as a result of the war. So somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million Iraqi civilians died as a result of that war, and 200,000 from direct acts of violence alone, which means mortar shells, bombs, bullets, tank shells, the acts of the troops themselves. The rest died as a result of the disruption of the other things I talked about, the gas, the electric, the water, the supply lines, the infrastructure. That is a massive, massive death toll. It's unthinkable, that amount of death. Now, in the Ukraine, so far, people are still using TikTok. They're still phoning people. They're still on the internet. They've still got gas, electric, water. That's because Putin is not the monster they're making out. He is not a Blair or a Bush. And the UN have estimated that up to 800 civilians have died. And I want to make it very clear. One civilian death is a death too many. One civilian death. 800 civilians, 800 Ukrainians dying is a terrible, terrible thing and should never, ever be brushed out or say it doesn't count. It does count. But weigh 800, and let's just weigh it against the ones that actually died in the war in Iraq. Let's weigh 800 against the 200,000 who died as a direct result of military aggression. They are vastly different numbers, because what's happening here, this isn't a leveling of a country. And let's make it very clear, America and the UK level countries because this is a business to them. Once they've leveled the country and killed and maimed and destroyed everything in sight, they then charge that country for the service of it being leveled and needing rebuilding. This is a business. Then American and British contractors go there and rebuild that country so that America and Britain can say, well, we're taking all your gold reserves, we're taking all your oil, we're taking all your natural resources in payment for us rebuilding your country that we flattened without you asking, but we're liberators anyway. This is insane. And then you have war criminals like Bush and Blair who walk free and get remunerated for the rest of their lives for their evil deeds. These people are monsters. They're demons in human skin. Now, what Putin has done, not saying that war is a good thing, but this war, when held up to the standard of Western warfare, is, nothing close to the brutality you see from Western warfare. So I think this could drag on because Putin is encircling cities. He's not flattening the place. He's not bombing it to the ends of the earth. They talk about a theater that accidentally got hit by a missile and talk about it as if it's, the greatest war crime ever. Well, let's talk about the invasion of Iraq. Let's talk about the complete destruction of Baghdad. Let's talk about what went on in Afghanistan. Let's talk about what went on in Libya or Syria at the hands of, coalition forces, of, allied forces. I think this could drag on for quite some time, but I think it's going to drag on because Putin, despite wanting to ensure his interests in the region, he isn't the monster that British and American establishments are. And that needs to be made very clear. And people in the West need to understand that their primary enemy is not Vladimir Putin. Their primary enemy is Boris Johnson, Joe Biden. It's their own governments. Their governments are genociding them. And Putin has ultimately been pushed to this. And he was pushed to this quite simply because the West wanted this war. And the West wanted this war for several reasons. They wanted regime change in Russia, and they were hoping that would bring that about. They wanted to disrupt the fact that Russia was bringing in new pipelines which were going to supply the whole of Europe with cheap gas. They didn't want countries like Germany being independent and buying gas from Russia. They didn't want the Russian economy continuing to grow. Russian debt is actually tiny compared to American debt, and that's something that should make all Americans feel very, very uncomfortable. But ultimately, they want to see, Western governments want to see white people killing other white people. And that's why NATO behaved in the way it did in the Ukraine, because they knew it would eventually lead to war. And the warmongers are those in London, those in Washington, those who have continually poked the bear and asked for this conflict. And the saddest thing about this is that their propaganda, Western propaganda, which is completely untrue about Russian forces being decimated, is leading to thousands of young, foolish, naive Western men going to fight there, and hundreds of them are being slaughtered, because fighting against the second most powerful military force on the planet is a lot different to going to Syria and fighting with guys, using old AK-47s and driving around in Toyota pickup trucks with no air support. And I made a video about this last week, which is quite a humorous video, but there is a serious point here. What the Western media is doing, what the Western governments are doing, is stoking war all over the planet, which is leading to naive and foolish men dying in their droves. And that is very sad.
Absolutely. Well said. You appraised, I think, what was going on quite well. I like the way, you juxtaposed America and England and Britain, bombing the hell out of Iraq compared to what's actually taking place in Ukraine. And they're not the same whatsoever. Also, the fact that communication lines there and their infrastructure is actually still intact, and buses, trains, are moving around. Supply chains might have been a little bit of an issue there, but that's par for the course actually over in Ukraine. And also they've been able to do it in all of this terrified thing. They're now one of the first countries now to institute after China is an old social of the credit of the system, let's say, and be a little bit cryptic there. And they've got vax ports as well in the country. So isn't it amazing? And you need high-level technology with QIG broadband as well to make sure that your surveillance grid is really tight there. And of course, now they're going to be instituting universal basic income. And Canada, in the meantime as well, has a bill now that's going to be through their parliament as well soon enough. Again, and it's going to be brought to you for your safety, it's for the betterment of society as well. Universal basic income, again, get people heavily reliant on the state, and they'll essentially be serfs on a plantation. Absolutely, really enjoyed this. We are coming up on the hour. Look, support and Catchmark on Patriotic Alternative is this fantastic website there. And as he mentioned, they've got upcoming information that basically it's a must. You gotta, as we say, get on it like a car bonnet. Okay, and I leave that link there in the description below. Also, please help out my work as well. I'm under a heavy veil of censorship. You can find me on Subscribestar. I'll leave a link in the description. Any help there is absolutely fantastic. We had over 100 people at one stage. Not so bad there for just coming up on midday in the morning time. So that's absolutely fantastic. I think I went up to 103 or 4. It was brilliant to have you on, and I'd love to have you on again. Mark, will you mentioned the last word there? And
well, look, I've had a great morning. This has been absolutely brilliant. I love these quick hour-long things. You know, I've got a stream later today at 7 p.m. UK time. I'm also streaming on Friday at 7 p.m. UK time. You're welcome to join me there. But I want to thank James. This has been a wonderful interview. It's been real high energy, real quick, real to the point. These are the sort of shows I really, really love. And James, if there's ever anything I can do to help you, if you ever want any link sharing or anything like that in the future, just let me know. Subscribe to this guy on Subscribestar. He deserves your support. Thank you so much. Hope everyone has a nice day, and I'll be streaming at 7 p.m. tonight if you want to join me on Odyssey and D Live. Thank you so much.
And also, again, I said you'd have the last word, but of course I had to go in there. And it's for you. Also go over to Mark on Telegram as well. He's just on the precipice of having 14,000 subscribers there. So let's get him over. Hopefully now by the end of the day this evening, he's going to have 14,000. Again, really enjoyed it. Thanks very much. And support Mark on Patriotic Alternative. See ya. Bye.